Don Knotts as Barney Fife.
Karen Knotts made people believe the happy version of her father's story. But then, is that the whole truth? Don Knotts was the face of harmless comedy. However, no one ever guessed what it cost him to wear that smile. There were pieces of his life that his closest friends had never seen. Now Karen has made a revelation that may change everything we thought we knew about Don Knotts. What has Don Knotts' daughter revealed? Let's find out. His childhood.
That's nice.
Most people only remember Don Knotts as the man who made them laugh. He was famous for his nervous voice and bugged-out eyes, which made him a fan favorite. His talent allowed him to turn simple words into comedy gold. It looked so easy on screen, but it was never easy. Long before Hollywood, Don lived through things that would break most children. His story started in Morgantown, West Virginia in 1924. The house he grew up in was not a happy one. His father struggled deeply with a mental illness, which was schizophrenia. Some days were silent, other days were terrifying. It was said that his father once pulled a knife on him during one of his episodes. There was no safety inside the walls of the place he called home. His mother, Elsie, carried the family's weight on her back. She worked hard, doing odd jobs like sewing and cleaning to keep food on the table. There was no room for rest. She did everything she could to hold the house together while living with a husband who could turn dangerous without warning. Don often watched his mother struggle, trying to protect him from both poverty and violence. Her strength became one of the few safe places in his young life.
From Undercover Assignment.
Don's older brothers did not always help. They teased him. Sometimes they made him feel even smaller. He often felt alone, even when the house was packed. That was when laughter became something more than fun. It became his shield. In the middle of all the chaos, Don found comfort in performing. He built a dummy named Danny and started doing ventriloquist shows for anyone who would watch. It was not just a hobby, it was how he survived. When people laughed, the fear in his chest would shrink for a moment. Then came the loss that would haunt him for years. His brother Earl, nicknamed Shadow, inspired Don's sense of humor, and the one person who understood him died suddenly from an asthma attack. Don was crushed. Earl had been his closest friend. After that, grief never really left him. It stayed like a quiet shadow, always behind him. As he got older, after his father died in 1937, Don grew more social and performing became his way out, his ticket to something better. He dreamed of a life far away from Morgantown. Then World War II came. Don enlisted, though not to fight. He wanted to escape. The Army sent him to the Pacific, and instead of carrying a gun with him, Don took his sense of humor. He joined the Stars and Gripes unit, performing for soldiers who were tired, scared, and far from home. His nervous energy, funny faces, and quick timing made him a favorite with the troops. No one saw what happened before he stepped on stage. Don battled anxiety so severe it nearly froze him some nights. His hands would shake and his chest would tighten. Yet when the curtain opened, he would smile and deliver the perfect performance. The laughter of the audience never showed the storm inside him. The Army awarded him medals for lifting the spirits of the soldiers, who needed those brief, humorous moments to suppress the harsh memories of the war they'd been subjected to. His name started to spread. Still, the same fears stayed close. Even with success, Don never stopped fighting the voices that told him he was not enough. The war may have ended, but his battles never did. And when he returned home, Don seemed like a man ready to conquer the world. He packed his dreams and moved to New York, hoping for something bigger. Fame was waiting. So were heartbreak, love, and new struggles. His childhood was far behind him, yet its grip on him never entirely loosened, and that would continue to affect his entire adult life. His love stories. The world saw Don Knotts as a funny man who could make anyone laugh. His first wife, Catherine Metz, once shared the same sentiment. Their love story started with excitement and big promises. Don swept Catherine off her feet while she was engaged to someone else. He promised her a life filled with laughter, happiness, and success. She chose Don. On the outside, it looked like the perfect romance. Their early days together were filled with hope. Don dreamed of making it big. Catherine believed in his talent. Still, behind the smiles and laughter, cracks were already forming. Don was battling anxiety, self-doubt, and the fear that he might never succeed. He struggled to land a steady job. They moved from place to place, always chasing the next audition or small gig. Money was tight. Catherine stayed home to care for their children while Don fought to build his career. Don's mind rarely found peace. He often sat in silence, lost in worry. His insecurities ran deep, and even when opportunities came, he questioned whether he deserved them. Catherine found herself married to a man far different from the one who had once swept her off her feet. Their marriage became a cycle of hope followed by disappointment. Every time Don seemed close to success, something would fall apart. His nervous energy, which made others laugh, was, in truth, a reflection of the storm inside him. Catherine tried to support him, but the weight of Don's inner battles created distance between them. Then everything changed. Don landed the role of Barney Fife on The Andy Griffith Show. Fame arrived quickly. The world finally saw what Catherine always believed. Don was special. Awards, praise, and attention poured in. The once struggling actor was now a star. Fame, however, did not fix what was already broken. The pressure grew. Don worked long hours. The spotlight brought new stresses. The distance between Don and Catherine widened even more. Eventually, the marriage ended. They divorced in 1964 after nearly 20 years together. Their love story, once filled with dreams, had quietly fallen apart, and after the divorce, Don found companionship again. He married Loralee Chuchna in 1974. Don was already famous at the time, but the same battles within him remained. Anxiety followed him into this new marriage. The couple faced many challenges. Loralee tried to help Don through his emotional struggles, but the weight of his demons remained heavy. Their marriage lasted several years before ending in divorce in 1983. Years later, Don married one last time. In 2002, he wed Frances Yarborough. By then, Don was older and more reflective. Frances stood by him through his later years. She became his marriage partner and faced the final chapters of his life. Unlike the others, this marriage remained steady until Don's passing in 2006. Don Knott knew how to make the world laugh. In his personal life, however, love always seemed more complicated. Each marriage, except his last, carried hope, struggle, and heartbreak. The man who made millions smile spent most of his life searching for peace that fame could never fully provide. Addiction.
I heard a room you couldn't cook in anyways. $6 a week, and what do I get? Heartache!
Don Knott became a star almost overnight. His role as Barney Fife on The Andy Griffith Show turned him into one of the most recognizable faces in America. Viewers loved his wide-eyed expression, his shaky voice, and his nervous charm. The character won him 5 Emmy Awards and made him a household name. To many, he seemed like a man who had everything under control. In truth, Don was barely holding himself together. Playing Barney Fife was not acting for Don. The nervous energy that made audiences laugh was something he lived with every day. Anxiety had followed him since childhood, but now fame made it even louder. The pressure to perform, the demand to always be funny, and the fear of losing everything haunted him behind the scenes. Before every taping, Don would suffer from crippling panic attacks. There were mornings when he could not even get out of bed. His heart would race, his hands would tremble, and his mind would be filled with terrifying thoughts that something terrible was about to happen. These episodes were not rare. They came often, stealing any peace he tried to find. In the early days, Don wanted to fight it alone. When the pressure kept growing, he turned to prescription medication. Initially, it was intended to calm his nerves before performances. The pills helped him feel steady. Soon, they became more than just an occasional fix. He began relying on them to navigate his daily life. What began as a solution quietly became an addiction. The pills were not the only problem. Don also battled severe hypochondria. He lived in constant fear that he was dying from an unknown illness. No matter how many doctors assured him he was healthy, Don remained convinced something was wrong. Every ache, every minor symptom, turned into a new fear. The combination of anxiety, pills, and health fears created a storm inside him that never seemed to calm. 0.15-0.20. At home, the struggle followed him. His marriage to Catherine Metz had already fallen apart. Later, his second marriage to Loralee Chuchna suffered under the weight of his emotional distance. Don often buried himself in work or stayed locked in his thoughts. His children felt his absence even when he was physically there. The man who made the world laugh was often too exhausted to engage with his family. The fame that brought him fortune also isolated him. Few people around him truly understood how deep his struggles went. Don worked hard to hide his addiction from the public. He feared what might happen if anyone knew the truth. He wanted to protect his image, even as his personal life fell apart. When Don finally left the Andy Griffith Show, he was not just walking away from a character. He was stepping away from the one constant that had given him structure. Without it, he felt exposed. His career was at a crossroads. The gamble he took next would either save him or break him, the risk that almost ruined it all. In 1965, Don Knott did something almost no one expected. He left the Andy Griffith Show while it was still one of the biggest television shows. Fans were confused. His co-stars were surprised. People asked why someone would walk away when everything seemed perfect. For Don, it was not so simple. Quiet rumors were swirling that Andy Griffith might end the show. Don had heard them more than once. That slight possibility weighed heavily on him. He worried about the future. Deep down, Don had never been fully confident that success would last. The fear of losing everything pushed him to act. At the same time, Universal Pictures approached him with an offer. They wanted Don to sign a 5-picture deal. The contract promised steady work, a healthy paycheck, and a chance for Don to become a true leading man. After years of standing beside Andy Griffith and being his sidekick, Don saw this as an opportunity to step into the spotlight alone. The idea of finally carrying a film alone was exciting and terrifying. Shortly after Don committed to the deal, Andy changed his mind. The show would continue without him. Don was now on his own, without the safety net of Mayberry. What once seemed like a brilliant move now carried enormous risk. Don threw himself into his film career. Movies like The Ghost and Mr. Chicken, The Reluctant Astronaut, and The Love God allowed him to bring his nervous energy to new characters. His signature awkward charm remained and audiences laughed. Some films did well enough at the box office. Others struggled. Audiences still loved Barney Fife. They were not sure how to accept Don as anything else. The shift from television to film proved harder than Don expected. Carrying an entire movie brought a new kind of pressure. On set, he battled with self-doubt. At home, the weight followed him. Don had always carried anxiety. The bigger the stage, the louder his inner voice became. He constantly worried about whether audiences would keep laughing or if his time had already passed. Outside of his career, Don's personal life was becoming equally complicated. His first marriage to Catherine Metz had ended. Though shy on screen, Don had no trouble attracting women. His gentle charm and vulnerability drew many toward him. Relationships often began quickly, filled with excitement and hope. Yet many did not last long. The deeper fears he carried since childhood usually crept in, making true intimacy hard to maintain. New roles came, though not always the ones he hoped for. Don appeared in guest spots, game shows, and voice acting jobs to stay visible. Hollywood is rarely kind to those trying to reinvent themselves. The movie business slowly moved on, always chasing the next new face. The fame that once seemed within reach now felt distant. Even as audiences still smiled when they saw him, Don faced a quieter struggle behind closed doors. His nervous laughter had carried him far, but peace remained out of reach. Blind. In his early 60s, Don Knott faced something he never expected. His eyesight started to fail. At first, it was little things. Words on a page became blurry and faces were harder to recognize. Soon it became clear this was not a simple problem. Doctors told him he had macular degeneration. The man who built his whole career on timing, expressions, and careful delivery was now losing one of his most essential tools. For someone like Don, this was more than a health issue. It was terrifying. His life had always been about performing. Every gesture, glance, and every tiny expression mattered. Now he could not even read his scripts. The fear came fast and heavy. The anxiety that had followed him since childhood returned stronger than ever. Don had always been good at hiding his struggles from the public. His nervous charm made people laugh, but few saw how much pain lived behind his smile. The loss of his vision pulled him deeper into depression. Nights grew longer, and thoughts raced. The man who once controlled every moment on stage now felt helpless in his own life. At home, the tension grew. His second wife, Laura Lee Chuchna, tried to be there for him. She offered comfort, patience, and love. Yet Don struggled to accept help. His fear of losing control made him distant and withdrawn. Simple conversations often turned into arguments. The man who once filled their home with laughter now barely spoke some days. Friends noticed the change too. Don, who once lit up every room, stopped attending gatherings. Phone calls went unanswered. The man who had made the world smile was slowly shutting everyone out. Laura Lee later shared that it was not the illness itself that ruined their marriage. It was how Don handled it, and his fear became a wall between them. Over time, the marriage could not survive, and they quietly divorced. After the divorce, Don spent much of his time alone. He worked when he could, though many jobs became harder to accept. Reading scripts required assistance. Memorizing lines took longer. His energy was not what it used to be. Even when he appeared on television or did guest roles, those closest to him knew how much effort it took to show up. Surgeons later performed delicate surgery that helped restore some of his vision. Don could read again, drive short distances, and even return to work. Yet the emotional scars remained. The fear that had once consumed him never entirely disappeared. As time passed, Don tried to rebuild pieces of his life. He kept performing, though on a smaller scale. Fans still cheered for him, grateful to see the man who had given them so much joy. Behind the scenes, Don stayed mostly private, speaking only with a small circle of close friends and family. Despite his struggles, Don never lost his desire to make people laugh. It was the one part of himself he never let the disease take away. Yet, without warning, life was preparing to deliver something even harder. A storm was coming that would test him in ways far beyond anything he had faced before. The cancer that ruined it all. By the early 2000s, Don Knott faced a diagnosis he had long feared, given his history with hypochondria. After years of smoking, his body finally gave a cruel response. Doctors told him he had lung cancer. Even though he had quit smoking, the damage was already done. His lungs could not recover from the years of abuse. The man who had once conquered vision loss was now up against something far more serious. Don chose to keep much of the diagnosis private. His children were not initially informed of the full details. He believed he could handle it quietly, like he had handled many struggles before. A part of him hoped this would be like eye surgery. He thought maybe treatment would work and life could return to normal. Deep down, though, Don knew this fight was different. Treatments began, but the procedures were exhausting. Chemotherapy sessions drained his energy, leaving him too weak to work for long periods. Friends who saw him during those years noticed the change. His once bright energy faded. The man who had always carried a nervous charm now moved more slowly, spoke more softly, and smiled less. Every task became a challenge. The weight loss was dramatic. His frame, already thin for most of his life, became even more fragile. His skin grew pale. The sparkle that fans loved in his wide eyes started to dim, yet Don rarely complained. He tried to maintain a sense of humor, even during doctor visits. Nurses recalled how he would still crack jokes, making those around him laugh while hiding his pain. During this period, someone new entered his life. Francie Yarborough, much younger than Don, had been hired to assist him with memorizing scripts. Over time, their relationship grew. In 2002, they quietly married. Few people knew much about their sudden and private marriage. Friends and family were surprised, though they respected Don's choice. The marriage sparked quiet rumors. Some questioned whether it was love or a matter of convenience. Francie became his closest companion during his final years. She helped manage his care, his schedule, and his home. When Don eventually passed, she inherited much of his estate. The public learned that his children were barely mentioned in the property division. This led to whispers, but no open conflict reached the public eye. As his illness worsened, Don spent most of his days at home, surrounded by a few trusted people. His daughter Karen visited often. She later recalled how her father tried to make her smile even in his weakest moments. The laughter that once made him famous never disappeared, even as his body failed him. What no one knew at the time was that Don Knott would leave behind one final surprise. In his last moments, a private confession would surface. Words spoken on his deathbed would reveal a truth that even those closest to him never expected. Deathbed confession. In his final days, Don Knott lay quietly in his hospital bed. The illness had weakened him, but his spirit remained strong. His breathing slowed, and his voice was barely above a whisper. Yet even in those moments, Don refused to let sadness fill the room. He had spent a lifetime making people laugh and would not stop now. Visitors came and went. Friends sat beside him, sharing stories, recalling old times, and doing their best to keep the mood light. The doctors and nurses moved gently around him, quietly surprised by what they witnessed. They had seen many people in their last moments, but few like Don. Even as his body weakened, he kept offering soft jokes and little one-liners. His humor had not left him. Karen Knott, his daughter, remained close by. She had grown up watching her father make millions of people laugh, yet she also knew the private man behind the characters. For most of his life, Don had battled anxiety and fears. Those struggles never entirely left him, but now, at the very end, he was calm. Even in pain, Don stayed playful. During one quiet moment, Don whispered something so timed and unexpectedly funny that Karen burst into laughter. She tried to hold it in but could not. The room had been filled with tension and sorrow, and that small joke broke through it all. Overcome with emotion and embarrassed to be laughing during such a profound moment, she stepped out of the room to collect herself. That decision haunted her for years. She later admitted that leaving his side, even briefly, became one of her deepest regrets. Those were precious seconds she could never get back. She wished she had stayed, holding his hand and laughing until the end. Karen carried that guilt for a long time. A close friend later comforted her, offering words that she would remember. The friend said that hearing laughter as they leave this world is perhaps the most beautiful goodbye for a comedian. Karen realized that her father likely found comfort in hearing his daughter laugh one final time. That thought helped ease her pain. In the years following Don's passing, Karen often spoke about her father, sharing stories that revealed the man behind the fame. She described him as sweet, kind, and gentle, who never spoke cruelly about others. She remembered him being funny on television and at home, always making little jokes around the house. Karen once said, "He was very gentle, kind, and sensitive. He would never say a bad word about anybody." She recalled how much her father respected people and tried to keep things positive, even off camera. At home, his humor was light and warm. She said, "He was not Barney Fife at home, he was Dad." She also shared memories of helping him rehearse lines. Don would ask her to read his scripts without emotion so he could focus on his delivery. Karen once said, he would say, "Just read it flat, or I won't get the timing right." His work ethic was intense. Karen compared it to that of a concert pianist, practicing endlessly to perfect every beat, every pause, every stammer. Yet behind the jokes and the discipline, there was always his battle with anxiety. Karen acknowledged how deep his fears ran. Even at the height of his success, Don worried constantly about his health, often convinced that some mysterious illness was waiting to strike. She revealed, he got a great psychiatrist and had therapy. By the end, he had overcome everything. His laughter often served as a way for him to keep those fears at bay. As Don's final hours approached, his breathing grew weaker. His voice was nearly gone, but his sense of humor remained. He delivered a last joke to Karen in one of his final whispers. It was not a dramatic farewell, nor was it filled with sadness. It was simply another moment of humor, one final gift from a man who had always used laughter to carry him through life's most challenging moments. To this day, Karen has never publicly shared her father's final joke. Many have asked her over the years, curious about his last words. She has chosen to keep that detail private, holding it close as a personal memory between father and daughter. She once said that some things were meant to remain just between them. That last private joke represents everything about her father's legacy for Karen. Don Knotts was not only one of America's most beloved comedians, he was a man who chose to meet death with grace, humor, and love, even as life slipped away. His ability to find laughter in the darkest moments was not a performance. It was who he truly was. Today, millions still watch his performances. They still laugh at Barney Fife's wide-eyed stammering and awkward charm. They still feel the warmth of his comedy. Yet for Karen, his legacy is something much more personal. Carries the memory of a father who made the world laugh while quietly battling his demons, who faced life's end not with fear, but with one last smile, one last visit from an old friend. As Don Knotts lay quietly in those final moments, one visitor went to the bedside, Andy Griffith. Their friendship had lasted for decades, beginning long before fame and surviving long after. Now Andy has come to say goodbye. He sat beside Don. There were no cameras, no audience, just two old friends. Andy gently held Don's hand and softly said, "Jess, keep breathing." Jess was Don's real first name, one only his closest friends used. Don could not answer with words. His voice was too weak, and his body was nearly still. Yet with little strength, he moved his shoulder, the smallest of gestures, to let Andy know he was still there. Years later, Andy spoke briefly about that moment. He said, "I believe he heard me. I believe he knew I was there." His voice shook when he recalled it. This was not acting. This was real love between two men who had leaned on each other for most of their lives. Andy often said Don Knotts was the funniest man I ever worked with. He spoke about Don's deep insecurities and how he worried endlessly, even during their peak years on the Andy Griffith Show. He worried himself right into being the funniest man alive, Andy once said. That was the truth of Don's life. The anxiety that haunted him also shaped his comedy. Even in the end, Don never lost that. Andy said, "Don made people feel good. Even when he was sick, he wanted others to feel okay. That was his gift." The final visit was not extended. The words were few. The moment spoke for itself. In that tiny shoulder movement, Andy saw everything. The years of laughter. The partnership that had brought joy to millions, the deep trust between them was their final connection. That small gesture felt like one last performance for Andy, not for fame or attention, just for a friend. It was a final, quiet curtain call. Don Knotts lived his life finding light in dark places. Even in those last hours, surrounded by sadness, he offered a simple sign of comfort. That was Don, and that was his final gift. What do you think of Don's daughter's revelation? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching and spending time with us today. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned for more inspiring journeys right here on our channel.